Is there anything you wouldn't do for family? When your family is on the line, is there anything you wouldn't try? Any lengths you wouldn't go to? I'm not talking about a favor, like, hey, go to the corner, pick me up a packet of milk. I'm talking about life and death. What wouldn't you do? Think about that for a second. Okay, here's another question. What is family? Is it the crowd you attend weddings with? Is it just another word for the people you can't choose? Sometimes, but not always. I think you can choose. Sometimes it's about blood, but it's more than that. In this story, it's about blood. Blood is spilled. So I'm warning you right now, if you're squeamish, you're going to need earmuffs. Later on. You're okay for now? When we get to the scary part, I'll let you know. It's a cat story. Everybody loves watching cats sticking their heads out of boxes or wrestling with watermelons, acting in a French New Wave film. Right? This one is more like a Brian De Palma film or Agnipath. It's got claws, it's got teeth, it's life and death. The hilarious thing about cats for me is that they go to such lengths to prove that they don't need you. More often than not, they just totally ignore you. And ironically, it's one of those things that we love about them. By we, I mean cat lovers. Yeah, dog people, you can get a smoke. You can see it 20. But they do need you. Have you ever had a cat just sit down like right on your face? You know, it's the ultimate ambivalent gesture, like they're saying, I want your attention, and I'm willing to suffocate you for it. Or on your keyboard, basically anywhere that your attention is focused at that moment, when they do need you. Research shows that cats think of us as very large cats, with weird, inexplicable, uncat-like habits, who are occasionally useful to have around for when things get hairy. And this is just a theory, but I think that's how you end up loving something. The kitten was this big. He just fit right into my palm. You could have eaten him in one bite, and there were plenty of animals on the street that would have done just that. My roommate told me she found him, I heard all this later, racing back and forth across the street in front of a car station. His eyes crusted over with conjunctivitis. He was grimy, he was wormy, he was filthy, he couldn't open his eyes, and he couldn't close his mouth. He was meowing nonstop, meowing and meowing and meowing. And I think we have an instinct as humans to protect something so helpless, so vulnerable. I don't think that's within our control. So my roommate did what she had to do, and she scooped him up before some Qualis or Bolero flattened him. My other roommate said, "In geen geval." This one was Dutch, and she had very definite ideas about things. You know, labels on food in the fridge, tallies down to the last rupee, that sort of thing. No way was this cat staying. Just one night, my roommate pleaded. She said, we'll clean him up, and at least he'll be able to see where he's going when we kick him out. Definitely not a night, said the Dutchie. And I'm sorry for stereotyping, but it's so true. Definitely not when this cat was so... And this next word I know I can't even pronounce. It's a Dutch word that until recently I doubted was even a word because my roommate is not, you know. Anyway, it sounds like Harry. It means noisy, and that's the name that stuck, Harry. This tiny little, trembling, non-stop mewing thing became Harry. And once you give a thing a name, game over. It's yours. I'll admit, I was ambivalent about the whole thing. I abstained from that debate in the most cowardly imaginable fashion. I was a little freaked out, I'll admit. I never had pets growing up. I was an only child, and so the idea of sharing my space with a thing, anything, with a litter box. And as I mentioned, in a previous story, I'm pretty cheap, and I know that shots and food and all that cost money. But just one night, right? That was 8 years ago. Both of those roommates have gone their ways, but Harry and I are still kicking around. Needless to say, I've changed my tune. He is, I'll describe him a little bit for you. He's a very handsome cat. I know we all think that, but he's tabby on the back, and he's got a white belly and a very leonine face. And he's not this anymore. He's a lot more cat than he used to be. Yeah. I think this is just what happens when street cats hit the jackpot. They they start to look like the late Elvis or Bubby Lahiri with, like in a jumpsuit. They have that figure for a jumpsuit. Do I call it love? I'm not sure. I do say I love you every day to him, and that's more than I can say for any other breathing thing. And we do a lot of laying together in various positions. I have slideshows. So I think that's love, more or less, right? But here's the thing about family, and this is how you know it's family, is that my feelings are incidental. They're beside the point. With family, whether you love them or hate them does not matter. You're committed. And so here we are, stuck with each other. He still has the street cat kind of manners sometimes, We've been through a long succession of places together. And I've noticed that the more opportunity he has to roam around, the greater his physical circle of influence, so to speak, the less restless he is, and the friendlier he's likely to be with guests. And I apologize to any of you who've been to my place and had this experience. We've lived in a bunch of places. The first place was it was perfect for a growing kitten. It was a barsati with a huge terrace and a high wall, so he could chase after birds but not follow them over the edge. And later we moved into a place without a terrace, where it was a long trek down from the 5th or 6th floor. And Harry he learned to use the elevator. Or rather, the neighbors learned that he would use the elevator. And whenever he heard the door music play, he'd just scoot right in. And to this day, when he hears, okay, here I'm going to, So chena kya jo bhi hoga dekha, he perks up his ears. And as do I. But when there's no hunting practice nearby, he prefers ankles, any ankles that, or Achilles for that matter, that happen to be walking by. But 4 years ago, when I moved into the place where I'm staying now, I thought, this is perfect. Right? And the place is indeed very special. But for Harry, it's really perfect. It's on the ground floor of a bungalow with a front window he can just slide in and out of easily. Or if not easily, he can get his head through the bars and then squeeze through the rest of him like an X-Men sort of thing. So, great. When we moved in, it was totally idyllic. Harry spent most of his time outdoors, coming in mostly to eat and to sleep at my feet, and not even to eat my feet. And it was also a huge plus, I'll admit, not to have to clean the litter box, because he preferred to take care of business in the great outdoors, as you would too if you grew up that way. But when you move into a new neighborhood, you get new neighbors. Mine were, and are still, lovely, friendly people Surprisingly not nosy, Marathi speakers, humans. Harry's neighbors were not so welcoming. They were basically the junkyard cats from the dumpsters out back. They were like the feline equivalent of the warriors. Every once in a while, I get the feeling from the hair raised on Harry's back that some kind of West Side Story turf war was going down, and he was about to defend his territory. And he's a big guy, as I mentioned, so he can hold his own. But these cats were pretty rough, and more than once he came back limping. I'd have to take him to Dr. Kakare and Nicole, and I spent hours trying to force feed him antibiotics until I figured out how much more fun it was to crush it up in butter and smear that on his face. Every time the vet told me, "You have to lock him in. You can't endanger him by letting him roam around like that." But I was like, "Come on, Doc. It's good for him to get, into a few scrapes. It'll toughen him up," right? And naturally, I was thinking about my own ankles and the litter box. So I kept the window open, and Harry would lick his wounds and eventually resume his rounds. Until one night, my ex and I were awoken by a sound that was not human. And not only was it not human, it was not from this planet. It was piercing and howling at the same time and somehow kinetic. I leapt out of bed, I switched on the lights, and I saw it was the sound of two cats screaming at their highest pitch, locked in mortal combat while tumbling and skidding across the floor of our living room. Oh, at that moment, I actually saw fur flying in little puffs, like in a cartoon, around this lurching ball of cats, but a serious cartoon. And as soon as the light went on, the junkyard cat leapt up onto the windowsill, and just before he slid out through the bars of the grill, he turned to look at me. And he was the ugliest cat I have ever laid eyes on. He was mangy, he was filthy, he was hunched, he was battered, he was a degenerate junkyard cat with one eye. Which, he lost an eye, which is how you know that, so to speak, he had seen things. This cat came from the law of the jungle like one of the demented hyenas from The Lion King. And he deserved a nickname like Claw or Fang, like they call cartoon villains, but this cat was beyond naming. And at that moment I understood. I understood his need to protect his territory. I understood that for this cat to fight, and to fight viciously, was his nature. But for him to come inside and spray his filth all over my floor, attack my cat there, and eat his food while he's at it, no. That, unlike the fur, was not going to fly. I was boiling with an indignation that I had never felt before, because I'd never been attacked before. I hadn't been personally attacked, but I'd also never felt what it was like to be attacked as a family. This cat clawed at the very roots of our bond together, mine and Harry's. And the fury I felt was what any parent would feel. It was very clear I had to do something, so I devised a plan. No, not the plan of leaving the window closed and letting the one-eyed cat bang his ugly head against again. No. That would have been the smart plan. This plan was not smart. It was ingenious. This was the kind of plan that comes inside a box marked Acme Industries. The plan was trap it. Trap the cat, then drive him to Yari Road or Gorai or Surat, Ludhiana, Svalbard, somewhere far enough away with enough fish that he would not bother to come back. A humane plan, I should add. So the Rube Goldberg machine looked like this. I attached a net around the edge of the window frame, and through the edges of the net I had laced a clothesline, and that clothesline was tied to a bell, which was tied to the handle of the sliding window. And from the window, the line ran all the way down the length of my very long apartment and into the bedroom, so that when I heard the bell, I would yank on that clothesline as hard as I could, and it would close the window, cinch the net shut at the same time, like a bag, with the cat inside. Thank you. It was a patently ridiculous idea. And it worked. Almost. For a week, I set that trap every evening, and it just sat there. Not a tinkle. But I still couldn't sleep. All night long, I was poised somewhere between anger and adrenaline. Then, one tranquil morning around daybreak, I heard in my sleep that noise I'd been dreaming about. The bell rang. I woke up. I shot upright, I yanked on that line as hard as I could, as hard as I possibly could at 5 in the morning, and I heard the window slam shut, and then a scuffling. The sound of claws on marble. So I flipped on the lights, I ran to the front of the house, and there he was, on the floor, wrapped up in the net. And just like I planned, I threw a blanket over it, I scooped up the whole package, I shoved it into a gunny sack, and I zipped it shut. What's the one thing they tell you about cats? Okay, the other thing. Do not let them out of the bag. You've heard of Schrödinger's cat, right? I studied physics in college, but I never really understood what the problem was about. You want to look inside to check, but when you check, it changes the result. I don't know how it happened. I don't know whether cats have some innate ability to unzip bags from the inside, or whether this particular cat, by virtue of having flirted with death, acquired powers extending over the domains of time and space. But what I know is that one moment he was inside the bag, and the next minute his one-eyed head was poking out of it, like a cat video. And I tried picking it up, the bag, and shaking him back down into the bag, but that had the exact opposite effect. And before I knew it, the cat was out and trying to leap over the window that was now shut, because I yanked it shut that way, and not getting anywhere. And when I came closer, he ran to the other end of the flat, into the bedroom, and my ex was now screaming. And then he ran away from her, back to the front window, where he had no luck getting through the window, and then again to the back, and we fortunately have only 2 windows in the flat. And at the back, he tried to claw his way through the wire mesh that was wrapped around the grill of the back window, but he couldn't. And I closed the back window, and this filthy, one-eyed thing was there. He was sandwiched between the window and the wire mesh, like just behind glass, like an exhibit in a museum, or a giant microscope slide. And he looked at me, I looked at him, he looked back at me, and he was trapped. My ex was still screaming, "Let him go." But I was now about to let him go. I'd gotten this far, and I was propelled by this rage, by this adrenaline that was pumping in my veins. The instinct was fight or flight, and I was definitely not in flight mode. This was a cat that had threatened the safety of my family, and now I had him trapped. I didn't think. I picked up the bag, the empty bag, and tucked it under my arm. And then I rifled through my drawers, and I picked up a kitchen knife, a hammer, and a box cutter. And I headed around back. And at this point, I'm just going to reassure animal lovers in the audience that while there is blood about to be spilled, it is all mine. Not that that's reassuring at this point, but I had tools and I had weapons. And I had no idea what I was preparing to do with them. I'd never hit another person. I'd never hurt another animal with my own hands, but then maybe I just never wanted to as badly. I walked to the neighbor's door, which was the only way through to the back window. And they were by now awake, having heard the various screamings, and let me through. And as I walked back, I slid the box cutter open. Click, 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 click. The cat was still clinging to the top of the grill. So I took the box cutter, I made a slit at the bottom of the wire mesh, just wide enough for the cat to squeeze through, and I held the bag right up to it. I was sure that I could get this cat, of his own volition, back into the bag. I mean, look what he was up against. I gently prodded him with the back of the hammer, and he slowly edged his way down until he finally began to seriously consider this opening I'd made. But of course, he wouldn't go back into the bag. That was my adrenaline talking, but his was saying something totally different. He was trying his hardest to squeeze his way between the mesh and the bag. And now is the time for earmuffs. If anybody is squeamish, I think this is the first at Tall Tales. I'm telling you not to listen if you think you can't handle it. So, and I'll call you back when you're ready. Okay. The next thing I knew, I was holding on to both the bag and the cat. I had the cat around the throat, and he had clamped down like a vice with his jaw and sunk his teeth as hard as he could, as deep as they could go into my hand. He was biting like it was his last bite, like a bee that dies when it stings. He put everything he had into that bite, his heart and his soul, if he had one. That was his move. Our three eyes were still locked on one another, and both my hands were still around his neck. And now it was my move. My ex, still screaming, "Let it go, let it go, let it go," at the top of her lungs. She had been reduced to a murmur in my peripheral vision. I heard it, but I didn't hear it. The neighbors were also somewhere in the background, but my field had narrowed, and what I saw was a slideshow. It was flicker after flicker of ways to kill that cat. 100 different kinds of murder that suddenly I knew somehow that I had at my disposal, welling up from somewhere deep within me. Flicker, flicker, flicker. And I knew that somewhere it would have to stop. Maybe it was the witnesses. Maybe if it had been just the two of us, things would have ended differently. But somehow, after watching those 100 methods, I chose to let him go. He dropped to the ground, just like a cat. And he slinked to the corner of the yard and slipped out. And now I was dripping blood at a healthy tempo. Nice fat drops right on the cement where the cat had just landed. Drip, 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 drip like that. And I, I grabbed my hand. I walked to the front of the house. You can take your earmuffs off now, right? Right. And as I walked to the front of the house, I was busy reviewing the tape to understand what at that crucial moment had happened in my head. So I came back around to the front and drip, drip, drip. I was explaining to the neighbors in very animated Hindi what had just happened. And I was trying to come up with a word for trapped, like that movie with Obama in it that had just come out. Kya naam uska film jo abhi aa gaya. I was very excited. And my ex was handing me a towel and shoving me into a rick. And she said, I'll remember these words forever. She said, "Get into the rick, you dumb bum," which is Canadian for dumbass. And she was being gentle. At Lilavati, I got a few other choice names from the doctors, plus a rabies shot, plus 8 stitches there, and then IV antibiotics through a stent. They put it to my arm that you screw a cap onto so that you can come back twice a day, which is a great time to get some thinking done. When I got back to the house that morning, it was a beautiful day. It was a fresh start. Broad daylight and a steady stream of rickshaws plying the lane outside. All the palms in the compound had just been watered and glistened in the low sun. The bikes were freshly washed, and there, on the wall of the compound, was that one-eyed cat. The cat came back, just sitting there waiting for me on the wall. I can only assume that he came back to see whether I'd make it at all. Or whether I'd come back holding my tail between my legs. So here's what we did. We kept the window shut. White flag. I'd like to say we both took a few knocks, the cat and I, and it was a draw. But if you had to pick a winner, I think you'd have to say the one-eyed cat won just for having made it out at all. For days afterwards, I kept seeing that slideshow. I didn't get to sleep without seeing it. Flicker, flicker, flicker. And even today, when I sense violence nearby, in a milling mob on a news clip, or tumbleweed rolling past as the clock strikes high noon, I feel a shudder. It jangles that same awful nerve and triggers that same adrenaline surge as it did then. But it's more than that. It's a shudder of recognition of something hidden deep inside myself. Something I would rather not look at. I saw that one-eyed cat around once or twice. I'm sure he lived a hard life. A life of scavenging for scraps. There was always a younger, hungrier cat ready to tear at his throat for the juicier morsel. A cat less restrained than I was, or less of a pussy. And Harry? Harry's tangled with a few other toms, trying to stake a claim to his territory. Even one that found his way into the house, but none that posed an existential threat. One that posed a threat to us as a family. And I'm proud to say he can hold his own. But when push comes to shove, I'll do whatever it takes to protect him, because it's in my blood. Thank you.